Welcome to Convenience Store News' Small Operator Academy, an education program designed to help the industry's independents and small chains overcome their biggest challenges and stay competitive. We're pleased to have here with us today Steve Morris and Teresa Burdick to talk about workforce retention. Steve is the owner, president, and CEO of Retail Management Inc., RMI, a contract retail operations company that currently operates and assists with 41 stores across the country, partnering with individual store owners and operators. Steve started in the C-store business as a cashier some 30 years ago and has since worked in retail operations and marketing for both large and small companies. Teresa is the manager of HR, payroll, and benefits at RMI. She partners closely with RMI's clients, as well as store and field management teams, to navigate the complexities of employee relations, payroll, and benefits administration. Teresa brings more than 30 years of experience in convenience retail management, including extensive leadership roles in retail operations and employee-focused positions. Steve and Teresa, thanks so much for being here today. I will hand it over to you now.
Absolutely. Thank you, Linda. Teresa and I are excited to be here and share this presentation with you and talk about how small businesses can succeed in the world of convenience retailing. So we'll start a little bit. Linda gave you the bio there, but who we are in RMI, we are a contract operation and management company for small format retailers. If it's less than 4,000 square foot, we'll operate it, which means we do a lot of convenience stores, gas stations, truck stops. We also do some QSRs, quick serve restaurants, as well as specialty retail, such as tobacco shops or liquor stores. We target and really look to work with small operators. Those are the folks with 10 or store, or 20 or store, or 20 stores or less, and we can operate anywhere in the country. Teresa and I like to say in the lower 48. In the continental United States, but we can operate anywhere in the United States, which gives us a pretty wide view of this topic. So we're going to talk a little bit about turnover and retention and what that means for small. That's the idea for small businesses. So let's talk about how turnover is measured itself. In 2024, NACS, the National Association of Convenience Stores, reports that the average number of employees in a convenience store is 20.3. That's a 5-year high, meaning that we have more employees per store than we have in the last 5 or 6 years. And the average age of those employees is 38.6. When we talk about turnover, which is what we're going to talk about real quick next, how we calculate that is important to understand. So if you take a look at your individual store, the number of separated employees, the employees that no longer work for you, and divided by the average head count multiplied by 100, that creates the metric that we'll talk about here. And so as we move on here, I wanted to specifically give you these demographics and the makeup of the employees in our stores as we dive in to retention and goals, because the first step to any of this is really understanding the demographic of those employees. So now let's talk about the actual concept of turnover. Turnover represents the departure of an employee from the company, which can happen either voluntarily, such as when they quit, or involuntarily through such as termination. It's important to remember that not all turnover is negative. So, for instance, some positions experience naturally higher turnover rates. As you can see here, part-time roles see a turnover of 140%, while full-time roles see about 118. Interestingly, as you look through the assistant managers and managers, they're significantly lower at 36 and 22% for store managers. Why is that important? Well, it's important because as we talk about retention, that we understand that we can't treat turnover with a broad brush, because you look at the significantly different lower turnover in management and that delta between the hourly employees and the managers. So we need to consider the different demographics, the different needs of those positions to fix the problem. So now let's consider the impacts of turnover. For the good, the low turnover can lead to stable teams and cohesive work environments, which is beneficial for everyone involved. It's not always a good thing, though, because low turnover can also cause frustration with a lack of opportunity for growth and complacency with the jobs, impacting customer service and efficiency. And if there's a problem, low turnover can be indicative of a manager who's maybe afraid of improvement. On the other hand, high turnover can disrupt operations by having a less experienced staff, affect morale, and increase costs. Continued high turnover is usually a sign of a larger problem that's beneath the surface. We'll talk about that later in the discussion. about how to recognize and how to challenge that. So understanding these dynamics can help us manage turnover more effectively and address retention and create a more resilient and motivated workforce. So let's talk about the cost of turnover. I mean, that's critical for any organization. First, let's consider the recruiting costs. Every time an employee leaves, finding a replacement incurs expenses, from job postings to interviews to lost work time. Next, we have efficiency. When experienced employees leave, it disrupts the workflow and productivity, often requiring the remaining staff to pick up the slack. And then there's training and management. New hires need training, which takes time and resources and constrain the managers who need to oversee this process. And finally, we can't overlook the impact on customer service. Consistent turnover can lead to a less experienced workforce, affecting the customer's experience adversely, and that hurts sales. What you see on this slide here is the NACS data on the cost to hire and train an employee. When evaluating your compensation packages, which is what we'll talk about a little later, remember this value. So consider a 25-cent per hour difference in hourly wage. If your turnover is constant or even at the industry average, you're easily spending more in hiring and training than you are in hourly wages. So for example, at the $1,227, the cost of hiring a new part-time employee, that's 4,908 hours per year that you could have paid that 25-cent difference to. That's 2 full-time employees for an entire year with that 25-cent raise. So we've got to be honest with where the money is spent. So I encourage you not to overlook the real and hidden costs of turnover, and we'll talk more about that later. So we're going to talk about the 4 kinds of turnover and then how we address retention for those 4 types: frictional turnover, structural turnover, economic, and seasonal. So Teresa is going to lead us through the frictional turnover set.
So frictional turnover is essentially turnover caused by interpersonal friction within the workplace. Some examples are direct friction, which could not be getting along with coworkers. An employee may voice their frustration with having to work a shift with a certain person, or they can either be a simple problem, that can be alleviated by scheduling changes, or it could be a larger problem where employees start to form tribes or cliques. Indirect friction, where there might be issues with both coworkers and management, can occur between supervisors, employees, and it can be actual or it can just be perceived. Just watching how we control our actions and emotions in the workplace can really affect what the employees see. Finally, frustrations can arise from interactions with customer service or customers themselves. Frictional turnover can be quite common, and addressing it proactively can greatly improve your workplace dynamic and employee satisfaction. And it's also the most visible and vibe elements to a store that impacts customer service.
Next, we'll talk about structural turnover. This is the type of turnover that happens when there's a disconnect between employees, what employees can offer, and what employers need. So imagine starting a job and realizing you weren't told about some key responsibilities or parts of the job. That's an example of structural turnover. Another scenario could be when supervisors believe an employee isn't doing their job or fulfilling their duties, while the employee feels uninformed about those duties or their performance. This misalignment can highlights the crux of what structural turnover is. Additionally, changes in the job requirements like altered hours or relocation can lead to this kind of turnover. So it's crucial for both employees and employers to communicate clearly to minimize these mismatches. Remember that understanding and addressing these mismatches will improve the workplace harmony. The next type of turnover is economic turnover, and it's closely tied to the fluctuations in the business cycle. So during economic downturns, we often see a spike in unemployment due to factors like sales slowdowns and changes in the business performance. When the economy improves, employment rates typically rise again. One key example here is to highlight that when our employees are laid off or hours are reduced because of declining sales, that's a direct impact of economic turnover, and it's not always controllable by the employer. Additionally, consider the impact of changes in labor costs, such as increases to minimum wage or shifts in market wages or new competition. These factors can also contribute to economic turnover as businesses adjust to maintain their profitability. So in this area, by understanding these dynamics, we can better prepare for and manage these challenges associated with this type of economic turnover and recognize sometimes that these are out of our reasonable control. Teresa?
Seasonal unemployment is a fascinating type of unemployment that many people do encounter, even if indirectly. Consider how certain businesses, like those near colleges or in tourist areas, adjust their staffing levels based on the season. During the summer or winter, stores might hire more or fewer employees depending on the driving and traffic patterns and student presence. It's all about adapting to when and where demand peaks. This type of unemployment isn't necessarily negative. It's a natural ebb and flow that aligns with the calendar. However, for most employees, it can mean periods without income, requiring careful planning and possibly seeking alternative employment during off seasons. Understanding these patterns helps businesses and employees prepare and plan for these seasonal changes, ensuring smoother transitions and better financial stability.
So now let's talk about what we're here to talk about, the retention part. So now that we understand what's causing turnover, what can we do to address it? Teresa, you want to talk about that?
First step in solving a problem is recognizing what's in our control. So let's talk about who our workforce is. The average age of a worker in the United States is 42, but in C-stores, 42.9% of our employees are under the age of 30, despite having an average age of 38. The largest block of employee age is 25 to 30, representing a total of 20% of the team. Having a younger workforce not only means that the workforce we choose from is less accustomed to good workplace habits and good employee habits, it also means that we're less likely to see multi-year tenure in the hourly worker positions. This also is important as we look at what our roles are as an employer. With this younger demographic of workers, it means many times it's up to us to set employees up for success in their work career. Training and developing good work habits such as punctuality and interpersonal skills is interchangeable no matter what career they choose. Look at it this way. In the C-store world, our role is to train the workforce. Statistics show that 1 in 6, or almost 17% of people who have worked in a C-store, we have a big job. While each store is as unique as a snowflake, the industry at large has this hurdle to overcome. Recognizing who the workforce is and who your individual store tends to attract as applicants is critical in order to address retention.
Absolutely. So let's talk a little bit about what our employees are seeking in their workplace as we look to address retention. Again, looking at this under 30 demographic and under 40 demographic, their unique needs from an employer is important for us to address. First, let's talk about work-life balance and the flexibility that they rank typically at the top of their list, even above pay. This highlights the importance of flexible schedules and PTO policies. Employees are prioritizing their personal time and well-being, which is crucial for retention. Next is growth and development. Those are a key area. Our workforce values opportunities to learn and develop new skills along with having a clear path for advancement. This aligns with their desire for continuous improvement and professional progress. It also aligns with the age of our workforce and the status of their time and their place in their careers. Just like we spoke about, that we recognize that our role at this particular time in their employee career is critically important. Another significant aspect is the meaning, the purpose, and the impact of their jobs. Many employees under 35 are particularly motivated by work that's meaningful and contributes positively to society. That can enhance job satisfaction, loyalty, and both retention and recruiting. And supportive culture and respect are essential too. Benefits that enhance the well-being, like we talked about with flexible PTO and support for education or student loans, those can make a significant difference in the retention of employees. Finally, autonomy in a conducive work environment are highly valued. Employees appreciate the freedom to determine how they perform their tasks, and having access to modern tools and technology boosts productivity. By understanding these elements, we can better cater to our employees' needs and enhance and improve their retention. Let's talk about how that specifically applies to smaller retailers. So, work-life balance. That's a critical area that many surveys show that employees in the workforce value more than pay. Doesn't mean that pay is not important, and you have to be competitive. But something that small operators can do that's easier and better than the larger chains is have the flexibility to make those adjustments. Teresa?
As small operators don't fear paid time off. We offer it to both our full-time and part-time employees, earning PTO hours based on how many hours they work. What we find is, with few exceptions, PTO is not largely used. You may run across a few that abuse it, but handle those individually by adjusting their schedule or by coaching. Offering this option goes a long way with this workforce. Flexible scheduling, like 10-hour shifts versus 6 or 8 hours, supports a work-life balance and adjusts to improved customer service with fewer shift changes and handoffs. We've instituted a 4-day work week in several locations and have found it very effective. It appeals to both our older and our younger employees. Also, using technology for scheduling and access to their payroll records and pay stubs. Using a payroll partner is not always expensive, and it brings technology to your employees, but also can improve your administrative position and efficiency. We use a payroll partner that offers an electronic onboarding platform that has saved many hours of informational input. Lots of payroll providers have different options that can be tailored to your needs and to your budget.
Career growth and development teaches employees skills that are important regardless of their job or career. That's part of our role in the economic ecosystem. Next is meaning and impact, and it's important to employees. Being part of the community is being proud of who they work for. Here's a question. Ask an employee if they're asked at a party, what do they do for work, and how do they respond? Are they quietly embarrassed that they work at a convenience store? There's a stigma in society as generally people may think that convenience stores and gas stations are go nowhere, dead-end jobs. We all know that not to be true, but we do have to recognize the real feelings that are experienced by employees at all levels in order to address retention. Getting an employee to be proud of where they work by sponsoring a food drive or a car wash for the local scouting troop can help connect employees to the community. This is more than paying for a banner on the local baseball field and advertising. Look for opportunities here to organize volunteer events and partnerships and for the employees to feel good about where they work and involved. It's a little work, but for both retention and for the communities, it's a good thing to do.
Benefits, non-standard offers like education and/or student loan assistance goes a long ways. Making investments in your employees that encourage retention through financial support and personal development and educational goals.
And lastly is the work environment and technology. And what I mean here is that it's not enough to tell the employee when and how they need to clean the roller grill, but why. Explaining to that employee that in order to offer safe and quality products, it's got to be clean so we don't make people sick. And that by being clean, it's more appetizing and helps sales. That way, hopefully an employee understanding that why has now the autonomy to decide when it needs to be clean because they understand why it needs to be clean. Going that one little extra step is both training and development, but also autonomy. And then there's technology. There's a lot of tech out there that's affordable for small operators. We use a tablet in our stores for our checklists. Every shift, every day, the list of tasks that has to be done is done on a tablet. Each task is given a point value, and when an employee completes the task, they get the points. At the end of the month, the points are dumped into a pool for a drawing for a gift card or a small bonus. So not only are we making sure that our tasks are done, we're also giving the employees a chance to earn a little recognition, use technology to do a low technology job, and create a little workplace competition. So now let's talk about compensation. The dirty secret of compensation is to ensure that you look at the big picture and not the weekly payroll. At the end of the year, when you look at what turnover costs you, it's not just the uniform and the shirts and the training hours that you paid out and the overtime that you paid because you were shorthanded, but it's also the real and invisible costs that need to be calculated. The lost efficiency, the customer service, and the stress on your team, these costs all add up. So know your goals. Lower pay may equal higher turnover, and don't forget the cost of that turnover that we spoke about earlier. Know your market, because lower pay may mean lower applicant flow and lower quality, and understand what your customer service expectations are. And the next is work more, pay more. Consider longevity incentives like we do. We offer a slightly lower starting wage, but a quicker increase that is competitive, if not a little higher than some competitors. But by delaying the timing of that pay change, that weeds out those employees that aren't staying, are going to be short-termers and not forking out that money up front. but we can be competitive if after 90 days or 120 days, we're now better than the competition from the pay, and we've got that longevity and retention in. Consider full-time pay incentives, as we also do, and remember that turnover is lower for full-time employees, so incent the behavior and the goals that we want. So for example, we offer a 50-cent pay difference between part-time and full-time employees, understanding what those goals are. What you can't always offer against the big change is the long career path of the corporate world. But guess what? That's not the main purpose somebody starts out working in our industry. Knowing who we are and what our role is in an employee's career path is important to targeting the right retention methods for the right employee. So let's take a closer look at what employees often choose and why they choose to work in a convenience store. First and foremost, why do they want to work at our store? Or your store, picking up extra hours, extra income. They need a flexible schedule. Maybe they don't know what to do in between jobs. Be realistic about why folks apply and be real about what your store generates for applicants. That also means, what's the atmosphere? Bright, clean, and organized? Not all stores can be new and shiny, but they all can be well-maintained, cleaned, and organized. What applies for customer service also applies for your applicant flow. Second, it's important to lose the illusion that every employee is going to become a 10-year veteran. An employee that's with you for 6 months can be just as valuable as a 10-year employee. And remember that not all turnover is negative. It can bring fresh perspectives and energy into the workplace. So not all turnover is bad, and sometimes it's a natural part of growth and renewal. I often use what's called the Toyota principle, which is a principle that the Toyota company used in order to find issues in their supply chain. And they do this by asking why 5 times. If you answer truthfully, at the end of this, by the 5th why, you get to the root cause of a problem. And that's often taught in business and colleges all across the world. And I use this in an example of turnover. And I have a story where a store manager was going to terminate an employee because the employee was always late for work. And so I asked the manager, well, why is the employee late? Well, they're never here to start their shift. They're supposed to start at 7. Well, why are they late? Well, they take the bus. Okay, well, what's the bus schedule? By the 2nd why, I started to understand a little bit of what the problem was. And the bus schedule doesn't change. And it was impossible for the employee to be there at 7 o'clock in the morning. So we were going to terminate an employee for something that they couldn't control. So that's a difference between when you look at turnover and we're going to fire that employee because they were always late, when it wasn't possible for that employee to make it. They were doing their best. So adjust the schedule, adjust the expectations, be real about what we're talking about, because that employee was a good employee. They just couldn't meet the requirements of that particular shift. So let's be real and use the why principle when you're talking through a problem and looking at a problem employee. Finally, let's consider this. Watching pennies sometimes means losing dollars. Focusing too narrowly on cost saving can lead to larger and consistent expenses down the line, such as high turnover and training. So balance is key. Investing in employees often leads to greater long-term results. You can compete, big or small, with anybody, but you also have advantages of being a small operator. Costs for larger employees are magnified. You can be nimble. Your employees can know directly that they're valued and not another corporate number. That's hard to do in a large company. I worked for a large C-sort company, and trust me when I say, we often talked about how we can be more granular, more authentic, and take the corporate out of it for employees. That's an advantage that small businesses and small operators have. Being a small operator is truly a competitive advantage. Sometimes it may not seem that way, but you can do the things the big guys struggle with, and that's be authentic and be involved. Addressing turnover is also never done. It's a constant part of the business that needs constant review. Know your employees, know their needs, and design compensation and benefit programs that target those specific needs. Don't lose sight of the dollar by focusing on the penny. Forcing employees into a rigid and stale process and a way of doing things can have big impacts on their happiness, their performance, and their retention. So with that, that's our time. And I thank you for your time and listening to Teresa and I. And remember, employee needs change. So should you.
Thank you, Steve and Teresa, for that wonderful presentation and for providing our Small Operator Academy members with such valuable advice on how to improve labor retention. It's such an important topic in the industry today.
Absolutely. We agree. It was our pleasure.
Thank you, Linda.